going to be the only one here.
Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening with the Council Bluffs Public Library in this virtual presentation. The Tokyo Olympics are going to begin a week from tomorrow. The decision to hold them this year in the midst of Japan's fears of the COVID spread has created yet again a very unique experience. The 2020 Tokyo Summer Olympics were wiped out by the COVID-19 pandemic and was the first Olympics canceled since 1940 and 1944 games because of World War II. Despite these hurdles, the International Olympic Committee went to extraordinary measures to make sure the game must go on. The lead up to the 2021 Tokyo Games is unlike any other in history and will be a political statement as well. Evan Weiner, our speaker tonight, an author with a radio and TV background, who shared with us last winter about the Super Bowl, joins us tonight from New York. He will take comments and questions after his presentation. Please add them to the chat box or the Q&A. And now I'm going to turn the presentation, The Olympics, It Has Always Been a Political Platform, over to Evan.
Okay, thank you, Marlis, and thank you for inviting me. We need to share the screen here because I have to put up the...
It's all yours.
No, it's all mine. Thank you, Marlis. Thank you for inviting me, and give me 1 second to get everything up there. There we go. Thank you, Marlis. And thank you for joining me tonight from New York. A little background on me. In 1984, the Los Angeles Olympics, I dealt with the guy who ran it, Peter Ueberroth, his #2 guy, the late Harry Usher, Rennie Henry, who was at the White House in 1977 with Ueberroth, and also a lawyer by the name of James Argue, one of the great lawyer names of all time, the late Shelley Saltman, Rich Levin, Harvey Schiller. These are all people I have dealt with over the years. They were part of the LA Olympics. Also, the former Democratic Majority Leader of the United States Senate, George Mitchell, who authored the report on the Salt Lake City bribery in the late 1990s. So I dealt with him as well, along with Juan Antonio Samaranch, who was Francisco Franco, the fascist dictator of Spain. He was one of his secretaries. So I've been involved with these guys for a very, very, very long time, for about 40 years. And I think I know a couple things about how these guys operate. By the way, the International Olympic Committee has permanent observer status at the United Nations. The games must go on. That was the mantra by Avery Brundage following the Munich massacre in 1972, which was the worst terrorist attack ever on the Olympics. First time you saw terrorism in your living room back in 1972. And afterwards, Brundage said, the games have to go on. The games must go on, and so will these. Tokyo 2020. The president of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, is in Tokyo right now. And the first thing he did was, when he got there and spoke to the Japanese media, an absolute blunder. He said to them that these Olympics are going to be very trying and that the Chinese people need to be saluted. And he caught himself and said, I mean the Japanese people. The translation of what Bach did was not available in Japan, but it was available worldwide, and he got roasted on Twitter for that. So Bach is there, says it's going to be a safe Olympics. We will see what we will see. But these are the people. They have not been vaccinated in great quantity in Tokyo and in Japan. And in fact, Japan is in another lockdown. The International Olympic Committee has permanent observer status at the United Nations. The International Olympic Committee acts in many ways as a sovereign nation, and they require presidents, prime ministers, other leaders to appear before them, literally genuflecting before them during the Olympic bidding. In the case of the Tokyo Olympics, now in 2021, although it's being called the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, the International Olympic Committee has the ultimate right to have these games go on or to postpone them. They, not the government of Japan, calls the shots. Now, Japan can probably say, hey, listen, we're in a pandemic. Why don't you postpone it? But the IOC has said, no, we're not going to postpone it. This is it. This is the only shot you got. You know, we are going to lose a lot of money anyway from last year. It was canceled. And the Japanese bid committee, who had to pay for a lot of this, along with the government, they're going to lose a lot of money, maybe $25 billion. That's John Coates. He's a vice president of the International Olympic Committee. And back in May, well, you could say he put his foot in his mouth. Coates is not an epidemiologist. He's a lawyer by trade from Australia. And he and Thomas Bach, the president of the International Olympic Committee, were not worried in May that 10 areas in Japan were in a lockdown. Coates, being the International Olympic Committee vice president, recently said in May that it was clearer than ever that the games would be safe for everyone participating as well as the general public in Japan. You might know this. There will be no fans in stands. Let me take this back. There will be no customers in the stands because these people don't want fans, because fans will nickel and dime them. Customers will pay full price for anything. So involving sports. So the place is going to be empty. Well, I guess it means that it'll be safer. The Tokyo Medical Practitioners Association told Coates and Bach back in May that hospitals have their hands full and have almost no capacity left to deal with a possible outbreak triggered by the Olympics. The Olympics start next Thursday night, Friday in Japan, next Thursday night in the United States. Comcast, NBC has a lot of money invested in this thing, and they want to see the Olympics go. Business wants to see the Olympics go on. Major problem at hand for the IOC, COVID-19 pandemic, illness that the group cannot control. Japan was in a lockout until May 31st. There was a poll in May that suggested 3/5 of the country's residents thought that the games should not go on because of the pandemic. And you saw things like this, Tokyo 2020 with the 5 rings and the stop sign, go home. Japan will take a massive hit, billions of dollars or yen, whether the event takes place or not. And right now the event is going to take place. But the IOC remains, or still is taking a blind eye on everything that's going on. After all, COVID-19 can lock down the country, but it's not going to lock down an Olympics. Olympics go home. No Olympics. Just say no. In June, Japan and the International Olympic Committee agreed to bar tourists from entering Japan to watch the games in person. However, the thought was millions of people in Japan could attend competitions at more than 40 venues in and around Tokyo. And that was true until last week when fans or customers were told no. Hey, by the way, about the tourists. Now, say you're in the Omaha, Council Bluffs area, and you decide, hey, you know what? I want to go to the Olympics. That would be last year, but, you know, they're postponing it. So, yeah, 2021, I'll go. And you generally have to go to a packager to get an Olympic package. They get you the airplane, they get you the rent-a-car, they get you the hotel. They make arrangements for you to eat, and also, of course, getting the tickets to the event. Well, the packager took your money or your deposit, and you're okay. You know, when everything is secured, we'll send you the rest of the money. Well, obviously, people were barred from going to Japan, and the packagers, who were sanctioned by the IOC, have said, "Tough luck, act of God. We're not refunding your money." Now, if you're in your area, where are you going to get a lawyer to represent you in either Switzerland, where the International Olympic headquarters are, or in Japan? You're not going to do that. So more, unless you really want your money back. So pretty much people have lost money on their travel arrangements to Japan. They're not getting a refund. If you did buy a ticket direct from the International Olympic Committee, yeah, you get your money back. It's estimated that about $850 million US, obviously more yen, will be refunded by the International Olympic Committee. International Olympic Committee in June told the Wall Street Journal that it had entered into the operational delivery phase of the Olympics, and it's become clearer than ever that these games will be safe for everyone participating and the Japanese people. And then the Olympic relay torch run or walk, depending on if you got the torch, your physical condition, whether you can run or walk, was postponed. When Bach got to Japan, he had to do 3 days worth of basically isolation, as did Coates, to make sure that they did not carry COVID-19 into the country. Bach said that he was vaccinated, and so did Coates. They're in Japan right now. Cancel the Olympics. Let's cancel the Olympics. Games must go on. But is it safe? Is it safe? Japan's having massive problems getting its citizens vaccinated against COVID-19. Through June 8th, only 4% of the Japanese population got the shots. It's now up to about 13%. Japan hopes to have most of its population vaccinated by November, which is too late for the Olympics event, too late for the Paralympics event. There's a 2-week gap between the Olympics and the Paralympics, and then the Paralympics has its 2 weeks. They're done probably around Labor Day, somewhere around there. And the country, most people will be vaccinated by November, but the games must go on. They must go on. And there's a Brazilian athlete getting a vaccination so she could compete at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. International Olympic Committee spokesperson recently said that well above 80% of the residents of the Olympic and the Paralympic Village in Tokyo will be vaccinated, but there's no verification of that. And there have been some breakouts of COVID among some of the athletes. And somewhere between 70 and 80% of the media will be vaccinated. And the media, highly important. Comcast, the biggest cable operator in the United States, internet operator, owner of NBC, and the assorted platforms, including Peacock and USA and the soon to go out of business NBC regional sports networks and NBC Sports. They may be picked up by Bally's, or rather Sinclair, because they got to deal with Bally's. So they may be interested in getting those particular television properties. Comcast has a deal with the IOC through 2032, paying them billions upon billions upon billions of dollars. And other CBC in Canada has rights, and BBC and all of these countries. They don't pay as much as the US. The US actually funds a good percentage of the International Olympic Committee's doings in terms of paying people and giving monies to federations and all that other stuff. But the games must go on. Bach is insisting, or last March was insisting, that the 2020 Tokyo Olympics would start on July 24th, 2020. But there were a number of Olympic committees that told Bach it would be much wiser to shelve their plans, the IOC, and hold the gathering at another time when coronavirus drug treatments and vaccines are available. Well, the vaccines are available. The drug treatments, that's another story. But the vaccines are available to, well, the United States, but Japan's having a big problem. Australia's having a big problem. Australia's back in lockdown. Canada is having a big problem. The border between the United States and Canada remains closed and has been closed since March of 2020. Chinese said, we'll give everybody shots, but apparently their vaccine is not as effective as the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine, or even the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and maybe even the AstraZeneca vaccine. So it's a problem. Countries are on lockdowns. And then the third world countries, Haiti just got its first vaccines delivered yesterday. And they're not the only ones that have been lacking vaccines. But Tokyo 2020 was postponed after the slew of postponements led by the National Basketball Association on March 12, 2020. Then the National Hockey League, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, and all kind of leagues around the world. Bach gave in and said, we can't do it, but we'll do it in 2021. But if we can't do it in 2021, there are no do-overs. Why? Well, because 2022 is an Olympic year, and there are advertisers who are not going to be able to pay, or marketing partners, full price for 2 Olympics in 1 year. That's why they split it. Used to have 2 Olympics in 1 year until 1994, the Winter and the Summer Olympics. That split in 1994. So advertisers, marketing partners don't have the kind of cash for 2 events in a year. And the Chinese Beijing Olympics is in February of 2022, and that's another politically charged Olympics because of the situation with China's human rights policy and the Uyghurs. There's some talk in the United States Senate about how maybe the United States shouldn't send a team to China in 2022. And right now, the National Hockey League is wrestling with money problems with the International Ice Hockey Federation and the International Olympic Committee about sending teams to Beijing in 2022. And of course, you still are going to have a COVID hangover in Beijing because countries are slow in vaccinating people. So the Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympics was postponed for a year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Right now, COVID-19 cases are increasing in Japan, and the fight continues between the Japanese Olympic organizers and the Japanese government about the cost of delaying the event and who should be paying those extra expenses. I got the answer for you. It will be Japanese taxpayers, and those expenses will be due at some point in the near and far future. Suga Yoshihide is the Prime Minister of Japan. And he's powerless. It's amazing. Here he is, the Prime Minister of the country, and he's powerless when it comes to the Olympics. The Olympics, like I said, will cost more than $25 billion. Business and media interest want this thing to go ahead as planned. They want it to go ahead whether there's COVID or not. Whether Tokyo is in a lockdown or not, and Tokyo right now is in a lockdown. It will be in a lockdown throughout the Olympics, which start next Thursday night in the United States as far as TV goes. Yoshihide's ability to successfully host the Olympics is seen as a major political test of his handling of the pandemic. No foreign fans. Local spectators, well, they were supposed to be allowed, not. The original plan was venues, 50% capacity or up to 10,000 fans, all of whom had to follow COVID-19 protocols, including wearing a mask and no loud cheering. Maybe no whistling. Whistling's a big deal internationally. Why no loud cheering? Well, because when you project and you're loud, your germs may go out 18 feet. But the Olympics, this Olympics is going to be tough to stage. There's no political pressure other than the COVID-19 pandemic on the Japanese government. Nobody is saying that there should be a boycott because of human rights problems or because of apartheid or because of fascism or even Adolf Hitler. The Olympics is far more than a sporting event. In fact, there are other areas of the Olympics that you probably don't know about because there is actually a part of the Olympics devoted to modern art or art in general. Now, paintings and sculptures and things like that, which nobody ever talks about. There was once even an academic part to the Olympics, but that goes back a long, long time ago. But there is that art component to the Olympics. The modern Olympics began in Athens, Greece in 1896. The games became totally politicized by 1936, although, let's back up a little bit because let's talk about how games were politicized, and it may have happened long before 1936. That's an Olympic tennis player, circa 1900s, and you could see her with the full, it's either a dress or the full skirt. She's got the hat on and the tennis racket and all that other stuff. And women were allowed in the Olympics in 1900. Modern Olympics had started 4 years earlier, and they were allowed to compete in the Olympics starting in 1896 through 1900. In 1904, in St. Louis, as part of the St. Louis World's Fair, they ended up with the Olympics. And this is a rather strange and bizarre tale that the Olympics would like to play down and never discussed. The International Olympic Committee agreed with this guy Sullivan, who was part of the World's Fair, to stage the Olympics in St. Louis. And there was a 2-day affair called the Anthropology Days, right in the middle of the Olympics. And what you think you are seeing is what you are seeing. These people who ran the St. Louis World's Fair and the Olympics went throughout the world to find savages, to compete against Anglo-Saxons to see who is the superior athlete. The 1904 Olympic organizers sanctioned what was known as the Anthropology Days, 2-day event in St. Louis where so-called uncivilized tribes of the world, they gathered all kinds of people, competed in the Olympic events of the day. James E. Sullivan brought the games to St. Louis. It would coincide with the 1904 World's Fair. The 2-day event, which Sullivan ran, was meant to show Anglo-Americans' cultural superiority over these savages, and these savages could not compete in sports. These people who were brought in were handed a javelin and told, throw the javelin. They had no training in any of these sports, and that was basically it. This was Sullivan's idea, and it's an idea that the Olympics would love to bury in its past. It's not talked about very much, but it did happen for 2 days at the 1904 St. Louis Olympics. That is Baron Pierre de Coubertin. He was the guy who brought the Olympics back to life in 1896. And the Baron, oh, by the way, when you look at Olympics, a lot of barons, a lot of sirs, a lot of lords, among others, who are the head of the Olympic Committee, or as I like to say back in the day, a lot of out-of-work royalty is involved in, or was involved in, the International Olympic Committee. So here he is, the Baron, and he's the International Olympic Committee president, and he tries to marginalize women's sports. After the 1912 Stockholm Games, he and many of his International Olympic Committee colleagues believed that an Olympiad with females would be impractical, uninteresting, unaesthetic, and improper. In 1914, there's a general session of the International Olympic Committee, and it makes it absolutely clear: no women to participate in track and field. But as for before, they're allowed to participate in fencing and swimming. Well, Alice Milliet of France was neither a fencer nor a swimmer. She was a rower. And she was very, 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 very upset that she and other women could not compete in the 1920 Olympics. And she made it a point to tell the International Olympic Committee, you can't throw us out. And they kind of like, go home, go home, do something else. Well, she and the other women did something else. The Women's Olympics as an alternative to the male-centric games. In total, 4 women's games were staged. Paris, 1922. Next Summer Olympics after this is in Paris in 2024 to commemorate the 1924 Paris Olympics. But there was Olympics in Paris before 1924, the Women's Games. 1926 in Gothenburg, Sweden, 1930 in Prague, and 1934 in London. The participants mostly came from North America, Western Europe, and Japan. This is kind of an interesting time for women in that women were gaining popularity in sports, particularly in soccer in England. There was the Dickie Kerr ladies a bunch of women who were called to work at a munitions factory because World War I broke out in 1914. And they were told, oh yeah, you could go use the facilities, the soccer facilities, because you need a break. And they turned out to be a great soccer team. 50,000 people, not uncommon to see them play soccer. In 1920, they raised money for injured and disabled soldiers, and the English Football Federation or the Football Association pulled the rug from underneath them and basically banned women from playing soccer from 1921 to 1968. Coincided with the International Olympic Committee banning women. The New York Times talked about the 1922 Paris Olympics and said it was notable for the development of women athletes in all branches of competition fitting to their sex. Remarkable progress was made by them, and almost overnight, they assumed a place of great prominence in the world of athletics. One swimmer came out of the Paris Games in 1924, Gertrude Etherly, and she lived over here, and well, not over here, but across the river from me, about 13 miles from me. Gertrude Etherly was the sixth person to complete swimming of the English Channel, 5 men before her, and when she did her thing in 1926, she eclipsed all the men's records and was the first woman who was given a ticker tape parade down Broadway for the event of swimming the English Channel. So women were making progress, and then they didn't. But there were women in the 1932 Olympics and the 1936 Olympics, and that is me and my wife up at Hyde Park at the Presidential Library, Franklin Roosevelt Presidential Library. It's about an hour from my house north. And I went there because I needed to talk to Franklin about actually 3 items, because I do various talks. One about the 1936 Olympics, one about why baseball continued after World War II, and the other about being the first person on commercial TV in the United States welcoming people to the World's Fair on April 30th, 1939. And I got all my answers, including why FDR allowed American athletes to go to Berlin and basically legitimize the Hitler regime. 1935. In 1935, the former assistant secretary for the United States Navy, a guy by the name of Ernest Lee Jackney, and Jeremiah Mahoney, Judge Jeremiah Mahoney, who was with the Amateur Athletic Association, along with others, pushed for an American boycott of the 1936 Berlin Summer Games. Jackney was an American International Olympic Committee delegate, and he was getting reports from what was going on inside of Germany. And on November 25th, 1935, he sends a letter to the president of the IOC. See, I told you about all those out-of-work royalty people. This one's a count, the count. Andre Belair-Latour floating the initial idea of an American boycott of the 1936 Berlin Summer Olympics. Judge Jeremiah Mahoney recommended that America drop out of the Berlin Games. It's Mahoney on December 8th, 1935, who made his announcement, we can't go. It was Mahoney, as the head of the AAU, who said, let's go to Germany. Germany was given the Olympics for 1936 and 1931 in an attempt to bring them back into the family of countries. And in 1933, Mahoney said, yeah, we're going to go. And then Hitler came to power. And within 2 years, these guys wanted no part of this Olympics. Mahoney and Jackney were joined by 2 Catholic leaders going crisscrossing around the country, the Governor Al Smith of New York and the Governor James Curley of Massachusetts, calling for a boycott of the games. But it all fell on deaf ears. The Berlin or Hitler Olympics was politically charged. President Franklin Roosevelt urged the American team to go to Berlin, knowing full well about the strangulation of Jewish rights and Roma rights and the rights of gay people, political opponents, all in Germany. Avery Brundage was the head of the United States Olympic Committee, and he overrules Mahoney. And he tells the Olympians, you're going to compete Brundage, by the way, his construction company had deals with Hitler and the Nazi regime to build offices in Washington, D.C. in 1937 before the United States cut off diplomatic relationships with Germany. Marty Glickman, Sam Stoller, Gretel Bergman / Margaret Lambert, Jesse Owens, and others were impacted by the games. Now, I'm in a very unique position. I'm 65 years old. I've been doing this for 50 years, doing this journalism for 50 years. I worked with Marty Glickman in the 1980s when he had a broadcast school for, I guess it was a school for play-by-play announcers to get better. And I was one of the people he hired to help those play-by-play people get better. Marty was supposed to run. Sam Stoller, I knew him. He ran the Milrose games in New York. Gretel Bergman / Margaret Lambert, I interviewed her in 1993. Never met Jesse Owens, never met Jesse Owens at all. But I think I'm in kind of a unique position because for some reason, I knew Marty, Sam, and Gretel. It's kind of amazing when I think of it. Marty, if you ever talk to him, he would say, may that Avery Brundage rot in the 8th ring of hell every day because he cost me my Olympic opportunity. Sam never talked about it. Gretel, in her interview with me, I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. Jesse Owens steals the show. There is Gretel, Margaret Lambert in the United States. Her real name, Gretel Bergman. From Germany, she's Jewish. And she goes along with the Germans. She was actually expelled in 1933 from her club because she wasn't an Aryan. She was Jewish, along with a guy by the name of Daniel Pren, who was a tennis player on the German Davis Cup team. And there was Eric Siegel, who was the light heavyweight boxing champion of the world, all expelled. They had no rights anymore. But they let Gretel Bergman continue and continue and continue. 2 weeks before the Olympics begin, they tell Gretel, you're gone. We're not letting you do anything. She had equaled the German women's record in the high jump. With that, the Germans sacrificed the chance for a gold medal with this action. So here I am in 1993, and we're at the New York Athletic Club. And at that point, I'm working for Mutual Radio. And there's a big United States Olympic Committee celebration of Olympians. And even though she was never part of the United States Olympic team, she became an American citizen. And she actually was part of the United States national teams at some point. And so I'm there, there's Marsh Snyder's there, and a guy named Bruce Morton, and a few others, and they used to allow me to ask the first question. And I knew all about the Gretel Bergman story. And it's pretty simple asking the first question. We had talked a little bit before, but nothing formal until the guy pointed at us and said, your turn, go ahead. And that was the PR flack who did that. And I looked at her and had asked her a one-word question. Why? She had the answer. I was the great Jewish hope. You see, you don't understand it. They were taking our rights away. Day by day, by day, by day, by day, by day, by day, but they let me continue. They let me continue. So I figured I'm the great Jewish hope. I'll give my people some hope because you don't know how desperate they were. You don't know how desperate people were. And maybe if I gave them a ray of sunshine, maybe, make their life better. But in the end, Gretel Bergman was no different than anybody else. In 1937, she was able to obtain papers which allowed her and her boyfriend at the time, Dr. Bruno Lambert, who she would marry eventually, to emigrate to the United States, first to Ellis Island and then across the river to Manhattan. And she would end up in Queens, New York, about 22 miles from Ellis Island, if that much, probably not that much, actually probably more, about 10 to 12 miles. And she comes to the United States, and he comes to the United States. They have $20 between them. All the money the Germans were allowed to take out of the country, but she was sponsored. She would work as a masseuse, a housemaid, and later as a physical therapist. She had a new life. and she was going to enjoy her new life in the United States. And she was allowed to be on the U.S. women's team. In 1937, she won the high jump championships, and she did so in 1938. In 1937, she won the shot put championship. She was the best athlete, male or female, in Europe going into the 1936 Olympics. She met Dr. Bruno Lambert along the way. He was an athlete as well. They both fled. She received citizenship in 1942, 4 years after she married Lambert. And then she would fade into obscurity. Nobody would know who she is. She lived a quiet life in Queens, New York, not far from Shea Stadium, if you know anything about Shea Stadium or the World's Fair, where it's located in Queens. But she's inducted into the Jewish Hall of Fame at the Wingate Institute 44 years after she could not compete in the Olympics. And then all of a sudden, there's interest in Gretel Bergman, and that's why I interviewed her in 1993. Her legacy, well, the International Olympic Committee actually gave her a medal in 1996, a gold medal, because they knew 60 years earlier she was going to win a medal. So in the 1996 Atlanta Olympics, she got a medal. There were guys from HBO, Ross Levinson and Fuchs, Levinson and Fuchs, and they were after her. They wanted to do a special on her. And they said, you know what, we want you to go to Germany. And she told me in 1993 she was never, ever going to go back. There was no way she was ever going to go back. But somehow Levinson and Fuchs were able to convince her, and she did go there in 1999. And then she found out there was a stadium in Latham that was named after her where she used to train, renamed in her honor. The HBO special came out in 2004. It's called Hitler's Pawn, P-A-W-N apostrophe, P-A-W-N, Hitler with apostrophe, P-A-W-N. She died in Forest Hills 4 years ago at the age of 103. No boycott. Marty Glickman, fastest kid in Brooklyn. And Marty was a bit of a smart aleck, but that's why I got along with him. Sam, very quiet. Didn't say very much of anything, but Marty was a brash kid. He's 18 years old, and he could run like the wind. After all, he's the fastest kid in Brooklyn. 3 million people in Brooklyn, and he's the fastest of them all. And they're both selected to the United States Olympic Committee. But, and Marty told me he wanted to go. Why did he want to go? He wanted to win that gold medal so badly, and he wanted to stick it in the face of the Fuhrer. He wanted to see the Fuhrer's expression when he saw two Jew boys, as he called them, two Jewish kids from Brooklyn, Marty and Sam, win that medal. They didn't win the medal because they never were able to participate. The day before the race, the coach, Dean Cromwell, told Marty and told Sam, we need our fastest sprinters out there. So we're going to replace you with Jesse and with Jesse Owens and with Ralph Metcalf. This was almost sabotage because Jesse Owens never ran a relay in his life, and he didn't know how to hold the baton, didn't know how to pass it off, didn't know how to accept it. Jesse got up, told Cromwell, he said, hey, I'm tired. I won my 3 medals. Marty and Sam deserve it. He was told to shut up, do what I say. Back in those days, he was, of course, a Negro, as was Metcalf, and they didn't talk up. Negroes didn't talk up in those days. And this is all documented in Marty's book, where he says Negroes didn't speak up in those days. And Jesse just sat down and never said another word. Went back home afterwards with 4 gold medals. Marty always said it was Avery Brundage who pulled the plug on him. Sam never said a thing. Sam never said a thing, although he said the day that he was pulled from the Olympics was the most humiliating day ever in his life. Let's go up to 1964. Please boycott apartheid sport. Hey, Avery Brundage, the head of the Olympics, said it's all about sports, nothing about politics. But when Avery was running the show, they throw South Africa out of the Olympics because of apartheid. That was a problem. For the Olympics, there was a lot of pressure on them to get rid of South Africa, and they do. August 18th, 1964, days before the start. of the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, the 18th Olympics Games. They were barred because of their refusal to condemn apartheid. And they were tossed out of the International Olympic Committee's group of nations in 1970 because of apartheid. 1968, as political as you could get, there was a disturbance in Mexico City about 3 weeks before the games. Demonstrators against a lot of things going on in Mexico City. The government came in with the army, crushed the demonstrators in a main park in Mexico City, cleaned it up, made sure that everything was good for the Olympics, no protests or anything else. They whitewashed it, but they couldn't whitewash this. The 1968 Mexico City Games. And there's Tommy Smith in the middle. There is John Carlos on your right, and on the left is Peter Norman. Smith was 1, Norman 2, Carlos 3 in the 100-meter run. And Norman would become a non-citizen in Australia because he supported this protest by Smith and Carlos. Tommy Smith originally advocated for the boycott of the 1968 Summer Olympics by the United States. And these were the conditions that the United States gave, or he gave, to the Olympics for the United States to be there. South Africa and Rhodesia uninvited from the Olympics. Restore Muhammad Ali's World Championship boxing title. Ali was stripped of that on April 27th, 1967, because he refused to take the oath to join the military. He was stripped of his boxing license in New York and other places without due process. Oh, Brundage, get out of here. Goodbye. Don't want you here anymore. Get out. And the hiring of more African-American assistant coaches. The protest that happened that night was carefully planned between the two athletes, who were never very close and still are not close to this day. As Smith and Carlos walked to the podium, they took off their shoes, protest poverty. They wore beads and a scarf to protest lynchings. When the national anthem was played, they lowered their heads in defiance and raised their fists in a Black Power salute that rocked the world. And if you notice the picture, Smith has a glove on his right hand, Carlos on his left hand. Peter Norman suggested that. And there is the picture. Peter Norman told them to split the gloves. Norman was in total support of what these two guys were doing, and that did not play well in Australia. Tommy Smith, a couple of years ago on the 50th anniversary of that, said, "I don't like the idea of people looking at it as a negative. There was nothing but a raised fist in the air and a bowed head acknowledging the American flag, not symbolizing a hatred for it." He went on to Oberlin University, and he's actually very friendly with my wife's cousin, who played football at Oberlin and also track and field. He was the coach of track and field, and they became friendly and still are friendly to this day. He went to college in the late 70s, early 80s. Carlos worked as a guidance counselor at Palm Springs High School in California, and he told the Guardian newspaper, "I had a moral obligation to step up. Morality was far greater force than the rules and regulations they had." As far as Norman, he becomes a non-citizen of Australia. On his left breast, he wears a small badge that reads Olympic Project for Human Rights, an organization set up the year before, 1967, opposed to racism in sports, set up by a guy by the name of Harry Edwards. Harry Edwards was and still is, a sociology professor at Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley, and he's about 6'10", weighs over 300 pounds, and we're in Indianapolis about 20 years ago, National Football League Combine. He looks at me, "Sit down. We're going to have breakfast together." I said, "Yes, sir," because he's towered over me, and we talked about that and a whole bunch of other things. Harry is also the conduit between these guys and Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco, and he went through what Kaepernick might face by kneeling during the national anthem. And of course, Kaepernick did not sign a new contract with San Francisco and hasn't received a new contract from anyone in the NFL since 2017. Norman told Carlos and Smith to split the gloves. Norman asked a member of the United States rowing team, "Can I borrow a badge that reads the Olympic Project for Human Rights?" and he got it. As far as Tommy Smith, he played in the American Football League the year before it all became one, the National Football League, with the Cincinnati Bengals. John Carlos was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles, was on injured reserve, and played 1 year with Montreal in the Canadian Football League. And Brett Musburger, he wrote a column about Smith and Carlos back in 1968. Smith and Carlos looked like a couple of black-skinned stormtroopers holding aloft their black-gloved hands during the playing of the national anthem. They sprinkled their symbolism with black track shoes and black scarves and black power medals. It's designed to go down as the most unsuitable demonstration in the history of protest. Musburger went on to a very successful career with the NFL Today on CBS, then as an announcer with ESPN, and now he's a tout in Las Vegas with some betting network. He didn't give it up in 2017. He's going after Kaepernick and the San Francisco 49ers on Twitter. Yo, 49ers, since you instigated protests, 2 wins and 19 losses, how about taking your next knee in the other team's end zone? Smith and Carlos and Musburger have crossed paths over the years. Whenever Brent sees them, he runs the other way. They say, hey, well, we want to talk to you for a minute. He won't do it. Smith and Carlos kept their medals. They were never asked to return them to the International Olympic Committee. 1972 is when terrorism comes into your living room, and you see it for the first time ever. The 9 Israeli athletes and the 2 coaches are killed in the Black September terrorist attack. The massacre, well, that starts on September 5th at 4:30 in the morning. 8 Palestinian militants affiliated with Black September, a militant offshoot of the Palestinian group Fatah, and that would be Yasser Arafat. And Black September had been around for a couple of years. They were involved in the civil war in Jordan in 1970 until King Hussein booted them out. And they went through Syria and they ended up in Lebanon. Anyway, these guys scaled the fence surrounding the Olympic Village in Munich. They were disguised as athletes. They used stolen keys. They forced their ways into the quarters of the Israeli Olympic team. 10 p.m. on September 5th, and that would be at 4 p.m. New York time, 3 p.m. Central time on September 5th, believing that they had an agreement. The German officials thought they had an agreement with the terrorists. The terrorists led their bound and blindfolded hostages from their quarters into buses that transported them to waiting helicopters where they were going to an airbase. Jim McKay did one hell of a job that day. Jim McManus, a former newspaper guy with the Baltimore Sun, failed quiz show guy in the 1950s, ended up as the host of the Wide World of Sports in 1961, the Olympic host. He was on for 14 hours. And they told him he was swimming. They got him out of the swimming pool. They said, Jim, don't even bother taking off the trunks. Just put on the shirt, put on the tie, put on the jacket. We're going to shoot you from the waist up. They'll never see that you're wearing swim trunks and flip-flops. You're going to be on. And he was on for 14 hours. By 12:30 a.m., September 6th, local time, by 6:30 New York time, 5:30 Central time, the shooting had stopped. 20-hour reign of terror was over. 11 Israelis had been killed, 1 Munich policeman, 5 Black September terrorists lay dead, 3 of the gunmen captured. At 3 a.m. local time, he had been on for 14 straight hours. He summarized the tragic outcome of the botched rescue with the words, "They're all gone." The German authorities never did storm Building 31. They allowed the terrorists to take the hostages by helicopter to a nearby military air base. There, the Germans planned an ambush and rescue operation. It was badly bungled. The 9 of the Israeli hostages were killed by a combination of terrorist gunfire and a hand grenade that one of the Palestinians set off in the helicopter as it sat on the ground. Richard Nixon. I dealt with Nixon in 85 and 86, 87. He settled the baseball umpires dispute with the owners in 1985. Nixon is the most powerful man in the world, bar none, most powerful man in the world, president of the United States. And he sends a letter to Avery Brundage, or a telegram to Avery Brundage, saying the games have to be called off. But you know what? The International Olympic Committee, they're bigger than the president. We don't need to listen to you. The games must go on. The games must go on. At the memorial service, September 6th, Brundage announced the games would go on. Before the Munich Games in 1972, Brundage said the 1936 Berlin Games was the finest ever. He would be a central character in German Olympics history. And Mark Spitz, 1999, I did an interview with Mark Spitz 27 years after the event, and I'll let Mark tell the story. The Jewish-American swimmer Mark Spitz set a record of 7 gold medals, sprinted out of Munich to London, in fear he'd be the target of terrorists. A news conference celebrating his achievements was canceled. Spitz, the swimming program had stopped, swam all my events, and that evening, the last day of competition was on the Monday. This happened on the Tuesday on the morning. Swimming was through, so I didn't have to compete anymore. Had a press conference right afterwards on Tuesday, and that's when everyone told me about this Israeli tragedy, or the thing that was happening at the time. It hadn't turned into a major tragedy at the moment, at least at that time. They didn't know much about it. The next day, I was whisked away. Why? He was a high-value target, and the Americans didn't want him there. Brundage, the games must go on, offered a 27th World tribute to our Israeli friends. Brundage was the IOC, and the IOC ordered the competitions to resume after a pause of 34 hours. He's gone. He's replaced by, I told you, Lord Killian of England, a Lord, Count, Baron. Howard Cosell was there, and Howard and I had a unique friendship. I don't know why, but we had a unique friendship, and I'm still friendly with his grandsons, Colin, who's a New York Mets public relations and now public address announcer. His other grandson, Justin, who's the principal of a charter school, and another grandson, Jared, who's a lawyer for ESPN. Cosell used to say Avery Brundage came of age during the time of William of Orange. And I was in Delft, and that's in the Netherlands. I come across this bar, and it's William van Orange. Take a picture, send it to Cosell's grandkids, and they were laughing, saying, "Yeah, you knew Papa rather well, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah, for some reason we were friendly." Apartheid and the Olympic boycott, 1976. South Africa is gone, but 25 African countries skipped the 1976 Summer Olympics because New Zealand's rugby team played contests in apartheid South Africa. The African countries protested to the IOC. The IOC wasn't going to ban New Zealand, and so 25 countries walked out. The Montreal Stadium, the Olympic Stadium, the Big O, OWE. The legacy of the 1976 Olympics in Montreal, Canadian, or rather the stadium was supposed to cost 250 million Canadian, ended up with a price tag of 1.4 billion Canadian. Montreal, Quebec, and Canada didn't pay it off until November 2006, 30 years after the closing ceremonies of the 1976 Montreal Olympics. That is Jim Craig. He was the goaltender on the U.S. Olympic team in 1980 with my son back in 1995, the 15th anniversary of the Americans winning the gold medal over Finland. The American boycott of the 1980 Moscow Games. The United States President Jimmy Carter forces the United States Olympic Committee to drop out of the 1980 Games because of the Soviet Union's invasion on Christmas Eve, 1979, of Afghanistan. The Carter Doctrine, which said the Soviets' attempt to gain control of Afghanistan and possibly the region was regarded as a threat to U.S. interests, and Carter was prepared to meet the threat with military force. The official announcement came on Meet the Press on NBC on January 20th. Unless the Soviets withdraw their troops within a month from Afghanistan, Carter would insist that the Olympic Games be moved from Moscow to an alternative site or multiple sites, postponed or canceled. But the IOC is not going to listen to Jimmy Carter. The United States would win the gold medal in 1980. They would be the gold medal team in 1980, but they don't beat the Soviets to win the gold medal, although most people think they did beat the Soviets to win the gold medal. On January 24th, the United States hockey team beat Finland to win the gold medal at Lake Placid. Yes, it was an achievement, but the real story is how this American team filled with college kids and one pro 2 days earlier beat the professional laden Soviet Union in a game that most people in the United States didn't see, didn't even know that was being played unless you lived in Buffalo or on the border, Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont. Detroit would know, and Michigan, and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana, and Washington, because you could pick up the CBC there. Most Americans had no idea the game was being played. The American kids upset the favorite Soviet team a couple weeks earlier at Madison Square Garden, and I was at the game. The Soviets blew the doors in on the American team, so they thought it was going to be easy peasy for them. Soviets set up shop in Afghanistan, and the Olympics become bigger than life. They're on a stage bigger than life. There is the game where the Americans do beat the Soviet Union. Now, under the Olympic rules, had the Soviets beat the Czechs by X amount of goals, the next day, and the United States lost to Finland, the Soviets could have won the gold medal. The hockey game took place on Washington's birthday, February 22nd. Game takes on a life of its own. It's known as the Miracle on Ice. There have been movies about it, books about it, all because the announcer, Al Michaels, Alan, did a TV special for his sister Susan in 1999 called History's Mysteries of Sports. Was on A&E, one of the worst shows you would ever want. And I'll admit that I was on the show. Anyway, the ABC announcer, Al Michaels, his game call at the end, "Do you believe in miracles?" Yes. Lake Placid game was the first event where USA, USA, USA was heard for the first time. Carter congratulated the team for beating the Soviets. It was only a game in the Olympics, but you tell me a bigger political or cultural game in sports or sports matchup of the 20th century, you're not going to find it. That was it. Newsweek, should we boycott the Olympics? March 21st, 1980, Carter announces the U.S. will boycott the Olympic Games scheduled to take place in Moscow that summer. The Soviets wouldn't leave Afghanistan on February 20th. That was Carter's deadline. And so grain was a weapon, being out of the Olympics a weapon, taking away computer technology, the goods that they needed, computer technology and grain, that wasn't coming, and there was a restriction for Soviet fishing in the American-controlled waters. So Carter said, get out, or you're not going to get two U.S. goods you need, grain and computer technology. 160 athletes, coaches, and support staff did not go to Moscow. And to show he was meaning business, any American connected to the team who wanted to go to Moscow and participate under a neutral flag would have his passport or her passport revoked. The Soviet boycott. Carter was unable to persuade Britain, France, and Greece and Australia to go along with this policy. Canada, West Germany, and Japan joined the boycott. Oh, the other legacy of the 1980 Olympics, the Olympic Village in Lake Placid is an upstate New York prison today. Carter failed. Soviets stayed in Afghanistan until 1989. The Soviets in the Warsaw Bloc countries boycotted the 1984 Los Angeles Summer Games. Roone Arledge, the head of ABC Sports, told the IOC, you owe us money. The Soviets and the other countries weren't in LA. And they said, nah. And there is LA 1984. I told you about Renee Henry. He's up in Seattle. My friend Renee, who just experienced the heat wave in Seattle and came through it okay, thankfully. He's 88 years old. He was also the guy who put together the 1976 third Carter-Ford debate, presidential debate in Virginia. 1977, Rennie and Peter Ueberroth and James Argue and a few other people go to meet with Jimmy Carter and ask him for support for the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics bid. Carter was supposed to meet with them, got too busy. They sat in a room next to the Oval Office. They were told, President sends his apologies, but he can't talk to you. Ueberroth takes $100 of his own money and starts the Los Angeles Olympic Committee. Tehran, Iran was thinking about the 1984 Olympics, but they dropped out, so it was just LA. UBROTH commercializes the games, and the LAOC, Los Angeles Olympic Committee, turns a profit. Virtually every Olympics since 1984 has lost money. The 2004 Athens Games contributed to Greece's insolvency. Like I said, the Warsaw Pact countries boycotted the 84 games. The 86 Atlanta legacy, well, there was the bombing that killed one person that Richard Jewell was accused of, and he was accused of it, but he didn't do it, and he sued NBC, made a lot of money off of that. The legacy is this: the Olympic Stadium, which was downsized for the Atlanta Braves and then downsized further a couple of years ago after the Atlanta Braves baseball team moved to Cobbs County. A local football team is playing in it. The 2004 Athens Games, a major drain on Greece, remains so to this day. Oh, the International Olympic Committee. This is before they got a permanent observer status, which they would get in 2009 at the UN. They told Italy, change your drug laws with Olympic athletes. If they're caught doping with illegal substances, let us handle it. You don't do it. You have strict drug laws. We don't want any part of it. They're just cheating. We'll take care of it. China becomes more accepted in the world community, hosting the 2008 games. Oh, Vancouver, 2010. The deal includes censorship of speakers at libraries. Guys like me could not speak at the Vancouver libraries in the run-up to the 2010 Winter Olympics because they might bring up the anthropology games or what happened in 1976. The Vancouver people, the Olympic Committee, the local bid committee, wanted a list who was speaking at libraries to make sure that they were not going to sully the Olympics image. Genuflecting, Tony Blair genuflected in front of the International Olympic Committee in 2005 to get the 2012 Los Angeles Games, rather the London Games in 2012. Vladimir Putin, well, he genuflected too in front of the committee to get the 2014 Sochi Games. He did that in 2007. Lula, he was the president of Brazil back in 2009 when he begged to get the Olympic Games in South America and Brazil, but he really didn't have to beg because the games were wired for South America. They never had games there. Hey, Brazil was one of those BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. They had all the money in the world, and the Olympic Committee wanted some of it. Brazil, Russia, India, China. India still has not gotten an Olympics. They fell in love with those countries. Their economies were heating up. Time to get a piece of the action. As far as Brazil, had oil, lots of it, money to invest in sporting events. But the global economy cratered in September 2008. The price of oil dropped significantly. Lula was out of office by 2011, but he got the games. He got the games for Brazil in 2016. He also got the World Cup, soccer's signature event in 2014. The drop in the oil prices, staggering costs of the World Cup, and the Olympics ended Brazil's ascendancy into the world of the big boy economy. Hey, where's Obama? Where's Obama? Why isn't he here? Where's Obama? Dick Pound from Montreal, International Olympic Committee delegate, Dick Pound. Olympic bids are so important these days to countries that it would be surprising for a country not to send its biggest hitter. If the U.S. doesn't match the others, it's something that will be noticed. In 2009, Barack Obama agreed to go to Brazil to genuflect in front of the International Olympic Committee. But Lula, simply known as Lula, was the most popular leader in the world. The IOC wanted a South American country to host the Olympics, and Luiz Lula da Silva got Brazil the 2016 Olympics. The International Olympic Committee demands that local governments pay any debt accumulated by the Games. Los Angeles, they put up $250 million. California, they put up $250 million, or $500 million combined, to help fund the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. The 2000 Olympics held in Australia. Sydney is still paying hundreds of millions of Australian dollars to maintain unused facilities. The United States had more troops on the ground for the 2002 Utah Games to protect the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics in 2002 than in Afghanistan after the September 11, 2001 attacks. London did rebuild the East End with the Olympics. There's no word on what it cost. They never, ever, ever officially said this is what it cost. Sochi 2014, did it cost $51 billion? It's a good question. Answer is probably more. And a lot of the facilities are unused. Rio 2016, hey, IOC wanted them. Brazilians were not happy with the cost of the World Cup and the Olympics, and they took the streets to protest during the Olympics. South Korea 2018, big money loser, but hey, games aren't supposed to be political. North Korea invites South Korea, rather South Korea invites North Korea to participate in the games. They did. And there's Thomas Bach. Thomas Bach is going to Hiroshima tomorrow, and he's not welcomed in Hiroshima. He's going to lay a wreath in the park that promotes peace. Hiroshima bombed in 1945, the atomic bomb dropping on them in Nagasaki. And he's been told, don't come, don't make a political point on our behalf for your group, the Olympics. What Bach is talking about here, the Olympics, never been as successful as they are now, so he says. TV deals through 2032, big money. Sponsorship through at least 2028, big money. But they can't ignore that they have an issue with the candidate process. Boston said no. Toronto said no. St. Moritz said no. Hamburg said no. Munich said no. Only two people bothered, or two groups bothered bidding for the 2022 Winter Olympics. And they didn't even have bids for Los Angeles and Paris. They just gave Paris the 2024 Olympics, gave Los Angeles the 2028 Olympics. Bach said, I do not need to go into detail about how the Olympic Games is used for political purposes by groups in some countries. It's political. Whether you like it or not, there's a lot of politics, and sometimes just watching the athletes is not enough. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I haven't even talked about doping very much, or the bribery that got Salt Lake City the 2002 Olympics, or maybe the bribery that got Tokyo the 2020 Olympics. Thank you, Marlis, for inviting me. Thank you very much. And the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Let me get myself back on camera here again. Hi.
Hi.
Okay. Well, wow. There's so much history that is tied up with the Olympics, and listening to you, just brings back lots of memories and issues and thoughts over time. There aren't any questions online that I can see, but I was definitely curious. Has there ever been any repeat of any Olympic location where they could reuse some of the buildings?
LA, Los Angeles 1984, and I briefly went into that. They bent every rule. They said whatever existing facility you have there, use. They rebuilt the LA Coliseum for maybe the third time at that point. LA, the 1940 Winter Olympics, which never took place, and this is something I left out. In 1937, Sapporo, Japan got the Olympics, but in 1938, China and Japan had a war, and they pull the Olympics, and they decide, well, you know what, we're going to put the Olympics in St. Moritz, but people in St. Moritz, and they held the Olympics in 1928 there, said, no, we didn't want it. And this is after Germany went into Australia, after Germany went into parts of Czechoslovakia, after Kristallnacht and all that. The International Olympic Committee said, well, let's go back into Munich. Those Olympics were never held because of the war. Also, the International Olympic Committee gave Mussolini the 1944 Winter Olympics in Cortina, and those Olympics were never held. But as far as the Olympics and reusing facilities, I don't think they're using any facilities from the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. And that's such a long time ago. And by the way, I got a quick story about that. Donna Deverona, who's a friend of mine, won 2 gold medals at the 1964 Olympics. Donna's as sharp as a tack. She's really, really smart. And she's got the 2 gold medals, and she wants to go to Stanford. And she's looking for a scholarship. She figures she's got the marks, she's got the 2 gold medals, but they didn't give women scholarships, athletic scholarships in college until 1974. So she did not get a scholarship, even though she had the marks and all that. But she won 2 gold medals at the Tokyo Olympics. I'm trying to think if there were any other Olympics. No, because if you look recently, Paris, it's been a long time. Los Angeles may use the Coliseum in 2028, although they might use the football stadium in Inglewood. Thinking back, 2018, South Korea, no. 2016, Brazil, no. 2014, where was that? I don't even know. Oh, Sochi, no. 2012 was London, no. 2010, Vancouver, no. 2008 was Beijing. In fact, they got rid of the main stadium almost after the Olympics, no. Let's see, Turin in Italy, 2006, no. Athens, 2004, no. Salt Lake City, 2002, no. Sydney in 2000, no. They were in Japan, in Sapporo, Japan in 1998, no. Atlanta, no. Lillehammer, no. That was 94. And I know they were in Seoul in 88. I forgot. Oh, Barcelona in 92, no. So the answer is no.
Wow, you sure know your sports facts. I'm
Well,
marveling.
you know, I live with these guys. You saw my friend
Yeah,
Rennie and
yeah.
all these other, I mean, you know, these guys and guys who I didn't even mention. I live with all of them. So
Right,
we
right.
talk, and we, you know, who's ever left from the LA Olympics, we still talk.
Yeah. So I was just reflecting as you were talking about all the lost money.
Yeah.
And I can understand in maybe not, of course, not knowing the various large cities that this Olympics has taken place in. You know, they all want to make an impression on the world. They all want to, you know, look good in the eyes of the world. So they build these fantastic places. But don't any of these countries ever think about, well, okay, the Olympics happens for, you know, just what, 3 weeks, 2 weeks short.
2 weeks
And
or
then
2 weeks and 2 weeks.
the buildings, you know, what's going to happen to the building? Can't they start thinking, build with a plan for after?
Well, the thing is that the Olympics say you don't have to have us. These are local businesses that want to have them in the city, thinking, well, first of all, we'll get the world attention. Then we could do infrastructure. I'll give you an example. Here in New York, 2005, they went after the Olympics. They didn't have a stadium. And there was a plan that, well, with the Olympics, they're going to build basically around the Hudson River and the East River. They're just going to make it a huge walkway. Why do you need the Olympics to do that? Vancouver, they built the fast train between the airport and downtown. Now, I had a car in Vancouver, so I didn't have to do that because I had a car. But why didn't you just build it? Because you need it in Vancouver. And Vancouver has more than 3 million people in the area now, and it's really important as a conduit to Asia. It's the second largest area now or metropolitan area in Canada, and commerce as well. You could do that without the Olympics. You could do that if you need to do the infrastructure, but they want to get the Olympics in there because you'll have constant television. But you know what? Once the Olympics gone, in fact, I'm willing to make a bet with anybody. 4 months after the Olympics, you name who were the top Olympic athletes. You know, there'll be a Michael Phelps. But how about the guy who wins in archery? You don't know who wins in archery. I mean, the NBA players being there, the pro players being there. And it's taken a lot away because there's the guy who's in archery has been training for years and years and years for that one shot. That's it. He's got one shot. Then the other thing is, you got Larry Nassar. You saw the FBI didn't follow up on Larry Nassar, who is the USA National Gymnastics team doctor. And they just let it slide. And the gymnastics program in the United States has a lot of problems and a lot to answer for.
All right. All right. Well, we thank you this evening, Evan, for this.
And I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in Council Bluffs, which I probably never would have had the opportunity. And maybe we could do this again in the future one time.
We will be holding our breath over whether and how this Summer Olympics is going to play out. We actually have very good seats with our own televisions for being able to see the athletes. I'm sure they're going to miss the crowds and the cheers and the hugs from the parents that aren't going to be there as they compete. But it starts next week on July 23rd.
Yep.
So thank you, Evan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to those virtually who attended tonight, and have a good night.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you for inviting me. Bye-bye.